Farrah, finally, it's been a long time coming. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Welcome.
I think, can I take you way back?
Yeah, please.
So you were a journalist, or
Yes.
you still are a journalist?
I still am, actually.
Yeah,
I consider myself a journalist above everything.
So do you call yourself a journalist and editor and journalist?
I call myself a journalist.
Just a journalist?
I call myself a journalist. On paper, I am an editor. I'm an editor-in-chief.
Yes.
And I suppose I run a business. But actually, when people go, if I meet people out at dinner, what do you do? I'm a journalist.
Do you think you could be an editor without ever being a journalist? Do you think you can run?
No, I don't think you can, because I think and particularly nowadays, I think, storytelling has become such a cliche. Everybody's like, we have to be about storytelling. But of course, journalists are trained in storytelling and how to tell a story. And, my whole job from kind of the age of 19 to now at 41 is how do you get someone from A to Z? How do you lead them along? And that is not easy to do, whether it's telling the story of your brand or whether it's getting them to read a newspaper article. That is a real skill. And so I don't think actually, and I think editors' whole job of an editor is actually, whether you're running a website, you're running a magazine, is to get people to be immersed in your product or your brand. And that only happens if you know how to tell stories.
So tell me, Matt, obviously we're talking about the order of speaking as much as anything else. How similar then is the journey of telling a story through speaking as it is through written?
It's the same.
Is it the same?
It's exactly the same. I think I've never believed that you should talk at people. So whether that's if I ever see a magazine article and it's just shouting at people. So I've never believed in columns. Any magazine I've ever edited, I took the columns out. The world is full of people with an opinion.
Okay.
And I've never been big on that. I've always been about nuance. And so I think anyone can stand on a stage and just shout at people and go, this is my opinion. I have found the best speakers or the best journalists or the best writers, they offer something surprising. In the middle of the story, I always talk to my team about what's the moment of change, what's the minute in this piece where a reader is reading along, or maybe you're a consumer, you're listening to a speech, and something happens which changes everything you thought this speech was going to be about. Because that's the cut through, that's the moment where they go, God, I learned something new today, and that's where it happens. So you've got to do it whether you're doing a speech or you're writing. Moment of change, surprising beginning, moment of change in the middle, and then your kind of swan song at the end, I suppose, your call to action.
So I didn't expect to ask you this at all, but so what's your opinion now then of the world of social, where it is just opinions and people shouting at each other?
I think it has a place, but I think it is really going to tire very, very quickly. And I think the world at the moment is so full of white noise and it's so full of opinions that opinions actually become worthless, actually. And I actually think it's a really good opportunity for people who are nuanced. I think people who understand the art of storytelling. I think social will always have a place, but we even see it now. People are moving away from Twitter. Anybody can give you an opinion, but actually what you want is an informed opinion. And the best pieces of content, I think, and I waver over calling it content, but actually is where it has nuance and it has both sides of the story, and it makes people, it agitates thought. I don't think shouting. I think we need more conversation and less debate. And what I mean by that is debate is two people shouting at each other. Conversation is two people coming from different ends of the spectrum and finding a place where they may not agree, but they see each other. That's right.
Okay, so my natural follow-up to that is then tell me about your view of the papers and where we are with news, I suppose.
I think news, the people that do the best sort of news, papers will always serve a purpose, and papers, I still get my news from papers because the columnists on papers, they are the best columnists in the world. And what I think a lot of people don't realise is actually they are backed up by research, because that's the other thing about social I've always been kind of nervous about is, and we know now with fake news, an opinion without any research is kind of worthless. So I think newspapers still do a really, I say admirable, they do a really important job. But the bit of the newspapers that I've always found the most interesting are the supplements of the weekend.
Okay.
And people think, oh, that's because it's a magazine. And I'm like, no, it's not because it's a magazine, actually. It's because those weekend supplements, newspapers know that that's when people have time. And that's where, if you want to get really important messaging to people, you put it in this glossy magazine. It runs over more pages. It has pictures. So it looks more palatable, but of course it's a really potent way of delivering a message to someone.
Okay, so taking you back where I started from, that move from being, well, not from being a journalist, but when you first took up Women's Health and you moved into this position of heading up this new magazine,
Yeah.
how clear were you in terms of how you wanted to run the company, how you wanted to take it, or was it something that you just jumped in with both feet and hoped for the best?
I think so. When I took over Women's Health, it was not a brand. It didn't exist in the UK. It existed in America and Australia, but it just didn't exist. And I only had a tiny team, very short amount of time in which to build this brand from scratch. So I really did. I was pretty much put into it, and on day one, it was like go. So my leadership skills, very much. I had no template really.
Yeah.
They happened on the job. And they happened through making a lot of mistakes, and that was really crucial, I think. Very painful at the time.
Were you lucky because, was there expectation from your bosses over you going to succeed, or was it like, we're going to give her a chance? And
no, there was a lot of expectation. The expectation was, we want to see if we should launch this magazine. Put out the best product you can put out, and then let's see.
Okay.
And of course the context was, it was a very difficult time for launching magazines. Magazines were, they were falling like skittles all over the place. People were like, digital's coming, it's the end of magazines. And so there you have me with 2 members of staff, so tiny, very small, minuscule budget. And we had I think 6 weeks in which to create something from scratch. And so what I was focused on was, how do I build a brilliant product? How do I tell the story of health? How do I make health sexy and exciting and not put some, lavender crystals in your bath to de-stress? That was what I was focused on. But actually what was happening behind the scenes was I was learning how to be a leader. And it was only 2 people, but actually I was learning how to be a leader under incredible pressure and incredible stress, and actually how to bring people with me on something that actually we weren't sure. We actually didn't think it was going to work, if I can be completely honest.
And were you conscious about this going on in your head at the time, or were you just in the moment?
I had to put it to the back, because actually I had to say, look, we have to go into this feet first. We have to deliver a magazine that is undeniable. You know, it has to be so undeniably brilliant that people have, once they pick it up, they want the next issue and the next issue. So I was not focused on the leadership side of things, but actually the leadership side happened very quickly, because I had to make decisions really quickly because we didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
I had to put myself in the firing line, which of course all leaders do, but I realised quite how much I was in the firing line. If it didn't sell 100,000 copies, we were probably not going to launch. I was very close to my team. I knew everything about them. I knew their frailties, I knew their strengths, I knew when they were wobbling. So I think that kind of micro climate, I suppose, that I worked under was essential for discovering and unlocking the sort of leader I was, which became a leader who actually was really good under pressure.
And kind of looking back pre being put in this position, were you still that same person, you just hadn't realised it yet, or do you think that it took you to a different place?
I think I probably was that person, but I think until you are tested, until you throw yourself into periods of discomfort, you don't really understand, you don't unlock your potential. And I think that's the problem. And I always say this to my team, I was like, you don't really know who you are until you're put under pressure. And I promise you, when you're put under pressure, you'll discover quite quickly what you're rubbish at. And that in itself is a blessing, because not many people know what they're not good at. But you'll also discover what you're really talented at. And I think my problem, and sometimes I get frustrated with people, is when they're so unwilling to go through the fire, because they're so scared of the burn, that actually what they do is they spend their life avoiding it, and so their career moves horizontally. And we all know there's people, their careers move like this, and they see their peers who are way ahead of them, and they go, what happened there? They got luckier breaks than me. And I always go, they didn't get luckier breaks. What happened is they went through the obstacles. And actually in going through the obstacles, they discovered very quickly who they were, which you have never discovered because you've always stepped back.
And for those people now, having been a leader for a number of years, what's your view? Is your view to help them through it, or is your view that actually it's not going to work out with you and them?
What if I put them into difficult situations?
And they take a step back and they refuse to commit.
No, my job is to coax them into the fire, I suppose.
And do you think you can do that for anyone?
I think you can do it for everyone. I think what I tend to do with people is understand, well, first of all, because most people don't know what they're afraid of. So first of all, and most people know the answer, by the way, you know, if they look into their kind of souls, most people know what it is that they're frightened of. So I get them to look at that and examine it. And then when we kind of pull it apart, I suppose, we go, okay, you're scared of this. Well, why are you scared of this? Then they'll go, okay, I'm scared of it for these reasons. And then I go, okay, well, if we could come up with a plan of how you wouldn't be scared of this anymore, how would you feel? And of course, most people go, well, I'd feel much better because I'd feel in control, even if ultimately none of us have control.
Yes.
But what I try to do is give them that illusion of control. And that's all anybody really wants. And then if they go in with a plan, they go in feeling in control, they're going to walk through the fire and they're going to come out the other side, often with a real understanding of who they are and often being really surprised at who they are, which I think is what happened to me in the end. I thought I was a fragile introvert and actually I am still introverted, but I'm made of quite strong stuff.
Yeah.
And I think most people are.
So, okay. What do they, then the flip side of it, okay, if you're giving them this coaching, what's your expectation from them? What do you want to see from them that actually makes it worth your time to invest in them?
I like to see change from them. You know, I like them to. I like to see change from them. I like them to be surprised at what they're capable of doing. I like seeing people stretched. But the best thing for me is when people are stretched, and then you can tell with people, like, there's nothing better than going home at the end of the day and feeling like, oh my God, that was really hard, but I feel really great. So my thing is very much, it's to stretch people, it's to challenge them. And then what I then see, and I saw this a lot with my team at Cosmo, is you show them that they can deal with challenge. After that, you start to see them approach challenging situations on their own back. They willfully kind of push themselves into their discomfort zone, and you're not needed at that point. Your kind of job is done. You just have to work through one kind of uncomfortable situation with them.
So when you moved from Elle to Cosmo,
yeah,
were you much more clear about who you were and how you wanted your team to operate?
Yeah, much clearer. But you know, I'm learning all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the things at Elle, you know, just because I've been an editor before and I've been successful, it didn't mean, it's different. I think the thing about leadership, which is why leadership is really hard, and when people think there's a template for leadership, I don't believe in it. I think really good leaders are those leaders who look at the individual in front of them and they respond to the person standing in front of them. And so the leadership that I might exhibit for one person may be very different for the person that comes into my office or comes to my desk the next day. And your job as a leader is to be in tune with what it is. You know, what are their fears? How do you help get them through those fears? What's the approach? Because some people like carrot, some don't. You know, some of them like stick. You have to understand that, and it can make it very hard as a leader, and you can get it wrong as well, which is why you've got to get to know your team. You know, when I joined Elle, the first thing I did was I sat down with every single person from the team, and I think they thought I wanted to know about the magazine, how did it run?
Yeah.
And I didn't. I wanted to know
About them.
Where'd you grow up? What university did you go to? You know, what did you do at the weekend? And I think they found it quite odd, but of course what it does is it gives you an insight into the type of person that they are. So when difficult things happen, you can call on that information. I mean, I know bosses who don't even, you know, they know nothing about the people that work for them, and they're kind of your family.
But I suppose also for you, kind of, obviously the brand is Elle, but you are the face of the brand in the context of kind of you're the editor, and yet your team are the ones who are producing all the content.
Yes, I produce content too. I've never taken my eye.
So I thought, okay, so but my question for you is, how much do you feel like you still got to make sure that it's in the content they're producing is, you still have that sense of ownership, or is it, there we go and fly?
It's tricky because actually what I have to do is ensure that the values of the brand are there in everything. So I will always, if I can, skim read everything just to make sure. I guess it's a bit like, I mean, I'm not a mother, but I imagine it's a bit like a mother. It's like once your chicks are doing well, you just need to check in every now and then and check that it's happening. But yeah, you do have to let them fly. What I tend to do is I'm very, very strict at the beginning, and I go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. It's like, this is how you do it, you know, this is why I did this. But then after a while, while, I start to withdraw, and the stabilisers come off.
And do you have a mental tick box that says, okay, now they've done that, I can...
You just know, and it's different it's different for different people. There are people at the moment who, it's brilliant, I can just let them go, and there's others that they need a bit longer. And that's okay, that's totally okay. I mean, actually, if they were all off, riding their bikes without stabilisers, that probably wouldn't be needed.
Yes. So, okay, so I've got to ask, kind of fascinates me, the world of publishing, because obviously it's publishing, and we live in the digital era and all those sorts of things. You moved to Elle so you can look after everything.
Yes, yeah.
Talk to me a bit about your view of the publishing industry and where it is, and what needs to happen so it still stays relevant and is...
Well, I think first of all, so my job is very much, it's magazine, which is my background, but it's also digital, it's also the event side, it's the e-com, it's the whole business actually, and as to your point earlier, I am the face of that business. So I have to make sure that it all links up, even though there are different consumers, you're speaking to different consumers across it, the values have got to be the same, there's got to be something there that joins them all up. Publishing, absolutely. I mean, you have to look at them as brands now. I think when, people go, oh, Elle, it's a magazine brand, I go, oh, well, it's a brand that speaks to women. I mean, that's what it does.
And is that, sorry, just interrupted, but is that a shift for your team to be thinking, or...?
Not all of my team, because some of my team are quite young. So they are very used to, it's a media brand. But I do have other people who are very wedded to, and I've always had this on Cosmo, on Elle, who are real purists, and they're like, we are a print product, but they understand that print products can live beyond the printed page. I think there absolutely is a place for strong brands, which started life as magazines. I do think the brilliant things about magazines, and I think this is where it is going to come back to that, I think digital is different. I think, I can spin a story on digital about, I can respond immediately, I can entertain people on digital, and I can engage them. What I'm looking at now is how do you sustain them, how do you keep them there, how do you produce content that in a world of content you cut through. The magazine though is, it's a really, if you're doing great content, it's a really, I hate the word safe space, but it's a real haven, kind of intellectual haven for people. We see this with like ebooks. People just don't absorb the information in the same way. They're going back to books. But what that means is, if you are a magazine brand at your core, you actually have to, I would say, this is where it's hard. If 10 years ago you were producing, 8 out of 10 content, now it needs to be 12 out of 10. Because actually you're not competing with other magazines anymore. You're competing with Net-a-Porter. Anywhere where there are eyeballs and minds at stake, that's what you're competing with. So you have to be a better storyteller. And if magazines give up that fight, if they go, we're just going to put out any old content, then they are going to fail. So you have to work harder, you have to be smarter. At Cosmo, we had to find the stories that nobody else was doing, and that's really hard in a digital world where there's so much content. But there's a lot of shouting out there. There's a lot of opinions, as we discussed. What there isn't a lot of is thoughtful, nuanced storytelling.
Is the world of journalists, are journalists stronger than they've ever been, or kind of do they need to step up a level because there's so many people who actually...
I think journalists are in a really strong position. Those journalists who understand how you investigate a story, how you engage readers, how you tell the truth. Remember, our whole job is to search for the truth. And actually, when you look at what's happening with the whole content landscape, with fake news, people are very cynical now about words. What do they mean? What's the intent behind it? I think actually journalists, if they stay in the industry, because there's a lot of brilliant people leaving, and actually I always say now is not the time for you to leave. They understand how to find the truth, how to be impartial, how to tell a story. And so those people, and creatives, creativity is the only thing that the robots are never going to replace. There isn't, creatives and journalists are walking algorithms. And it's always been our job, to tell people what they want before they even knew what they wanted. So the world of algorithms where people go, I'm going to be served what I want. Well, the reality is what you wanted 3 months ago is entirely different to what you're going to want in 10 weeks' time, but it's our jobs as journalists to go, here's what you need to know about, here's what you're going to be interested in. And I guess that's why journalists, you know, really good journalists with good ethics, they're very powerful in shaping culture. You know, our job is to look at the culture and see what's coming next.
And do you think that kind of the public need to wise up, get more attuned to what is a journalist and what is a fiction writer, for want of a better thing? Kind of, are there tips or anything that we kind of about how do you know? How do I know if I've got a piece of content in front of me?
Well, I mean, you've got to question everything. I think first of all, when people read any content now, you have to go in with them. I think that's why people are becoming cynical, and I think that's why people are getting tired. But you do have to question, where has it come from? You have to look at the voice. You have to spend, and this is the thing. Now you have to investigate. Well, who's the voice that wrote this? And what that means is, as a consumer, you're spending time doing that. Whereas usually, if it comes from a source like the Times or Elle, you know, you don't even have to, it's a hygiene, it's not even a hygiene check, you just know that this is coming from an authority.
Yeah.
I think now when people are reading things online, if you're a smart individual, you should be asking all sorts of questions.
And does that disappoint you, scare you, or it's like, this is just as it is?
Yeah, it's scary. It's very scary because you don't know. You know, I'm a 41-year-old woman. My job is to question everything I read. But if I was a 12-year-old reading a story, you know, I don't know, about the politics in Ukraine, I have no idea what is in front of me, whether it's true, whether it's not. And at that age, you know, journalism, words are very powerful. They can change so much. They change your outlook if you're doing it right on the whole world. And so you have to be really careful about how you deal with words. So does it frighten me? Yeah, it really frightens me, particularly for the younger generation. Where is their information coming from? How do we check it's legitimate? Do we want to check it's legitimate? Some people don't. You know, naturally, we're incredibly lazy. Not everybody wants to know. And so that blindness is really scary, not just for the individual, but for, you know, what's going to happen in 10, 20 years' time.
So let me just one last thing before...
Yeah.
The book.
Yes.
Why? Why did you decide to do a book when you were kind of forging a massively successful journalistic career?
Yeah.
Writing a book to me is very daunting.
It was daunting. It was really hard, Nick. I had to keep moving the deadline.
Yeah.
Ironically, it was called the Discomfort Zone, and that's how I felt, you know, getting up at 5 a.m. every day to write it.
Yeah.
The truth is, I wrote it because there wasn't any messaging. The messaging of the last kind of 5 years has been, and rightly so, you know, we understand that there is a lot of anxiety. People are scared. People are stressed. But the messaging was always... don't worry, swaddle yourself, coddle yourself. You know, if you're scared of something, step away from it. And actually I found, particularly for younger colleagues that I work with, that I didn't think was the right messaging, because actually human beings are incredibly strong underneath. And we're meant to carry a load, you know, we're meant to have a little bit of pressure, not too much pressure, but we're meant to go through tough things. And I didn't think the messaging, the cultural messaging was right. I think the cultural messaging was setting up a generation for not dealing with life properly. And so I was like, well, actually, if this book, if it's only read by a couple of thousand people going, there is another way, and actually, here's the best bit, you're psychologically and physiologically programmed to be able to deal with stress. I mean, we know that before you do. You know, if you tell yourself that you're stressed, then you become overwhelmed. But if you tell yourself that you're excited, your body changes, your lungs open, your blood flows faster around the body, you think sharper, smarter. But people aren't told it. What they're told is, if you feel scared, you are scared. And the best thing to do is wrap yourself away, don't do it. And it's stopping people from really unlocking their true potential. It's a disaster.
Are there more books?
Don't know at the moment. Yeah, I don't know is the answer. I don't think, until things change, I think the Discomfort Zone is probably, it's right for now. So until I start to see things changing.
And do you find, just kind of in terms of the Discomfort Zone and your views about the younger generation, how they've been mollycoddled, as you work with them every day and you look after them every day, do you see your workforce become more resilient?
Yeah, you see them transform, and you see them, this kind of light bulb going, oh my God, you know, why did nobody tell us this? Why did nobody push us? Why do we never push ourselves So yeah, you see it all the time, and that is the greatest gift really that you can give them, which is you are tougher than you know you are.
Obviously you've forged an enormously successful career, and one of the prime areas around it is what makes women tick.
Right.
Why was this always of interest to you? Is it something that's grown of interest to you, and what do you believe around the subject?
Well, I've always been interested in what are women interested in, and you know, my job as a journalist has also been to kind of identify what women don't know they're interested in. So I think it's always been important to me because I always felt that women were perhaps never serviced in that way. People made assumptions about women and have made assumptions for a long time about the type of people they are, about how they are in the workplace. And again, you know, one of the things that I get asked a lot about is imposter syndrome. Any talks I do, always hands up, always women going, imposter syndrome, it is a gender-specific thing and it affects women. What can we do about it? How can we eradicate this thing? And it's become a really trendy phrase. And so it's interesting for me because you start to notice patterns that a lot of women, they will, and this is a generalisation of course, but they often latch on to things which they're told as a sex, imposter syndrome, you should be worried about it. I always say to them, first of all, it is not gender specific.
Yes, I'm fascinated with
Everybody suffers
I didn't realise
from
it was seen as a gender specific.
It's seen largely as women suffering from it more than men. Now that may be because women talk about it more and men don't talk about it. And I suspect that may be one of the reasons. But I always say to them, I was like, well, actually, my advice is probably very different to what other people will give you, which is actually, if, you know, you suffer from imposter syndrome, you're not to question it actually. What you are supposed to do is to embrace it and understand that it's actually a really great thing. Because, you know, so I don't believe there's people who go, oh, you know, don't listen to it, imposter syndrome, it's terrible, you need to get rid of it. I go, do listen to it. You know, because actually that critic who says you're not good enough, that critic that says, you know, you can't do the job, they're probably right. If you're pushing yourself, you should feel like you're just about treading water. And when you do that, what happens is you start looking for answers, which means you perform much better. And I think a lot of the information that I read or that is aimed towards women, again, goes back to what I said earlier. It's about, don't worry, you know, if it's fearful, if it frightens you, you know, you can step away from it. And actually women, and we know this scientifically, you know, all these ultra runners, women are kind of trouncing men, not that I see it as any competition between the sexes, but women are particularly built for pressure and pain. And I don't think it's always acknowledged, and particularly not from women. And it can be quite a revelation to women when you talk about, you are so tough and you didn't even know it. So I think that's why I've always been interested in what women want, but also what women are capable of.
Do you get frustrated by it?
Yeah, I do get frustrated by it.
And is that why you're very happy to speak about it, because almost you want to kind of...
I think there is another way. I've always go, look, there is this way, you know, but actually... And sometimes it can be unpopular. Sometimes people don't want to hear, you know, actually, life is hard. But actually there is a way. So, yeah, I do get frustrated by a lot of, you know, particularly aimed towards women. Don't worry about it, look after yourself. Women are incredibly complex. And I think I've always thought that they're probably not spoken to in the right way. And, you know, people always used to say, you know, you work on a women's magazine. Well, I do work on a women's magazine, or I spent my career on women's magazines. But whenever I edited a magazine, it was always very clear to anybody that worked for me, we're interested in people. Because actually, men and women, they find the same things funny. They find, you know, they both find things intellectually stimulating. The best hope you can do is, if a man picks up a women's magazine or if a woman picks up a men's magazine, is that your journalism speaks to them.
And they're interested.
And I think sometimes, I used to get frustrated where people thought women were just interested in gloss and surface, and actually that is not true at all.
Okay, so you speak to women about what they can achieve and where they're going. But obviously you need society as a whole to give them the platform in order to achieve what they set out to do.
Yeah.
How do you make sure your messages and the things we've spoken about today and the things you speak about the whole time appeal to everyone and deliver a base so that actually women can achieve true success in a marketplace that historically maybe hasn't been geared?
You need to give them the space. You need to, I think it goes back to what I think I said this, which was about there are lots of different styles of leadership. And you need to make space for those different styles of leadership to take flight. So I think a lot of women, again, generally speaking, go into, let's say, positions of leadership thinking they need to behave in a certain way. Good companies allow female leaders and male leaders, but particularly female leaders, to do it their way, and they give them space. I think you have to give them space to do things their way. So, and it's a very different way of doing it. So I think that is important. But I think to your point about how do you make sure the messaging to women really includes all of society, I think you can't just speak to women. I think what you have to do is, my job is to speak to women, but one of the messages I always try to give to women, and I don't tell them, I give it as food for thought, which is, you're not going to get anywhere if you're only talking to women. You have to make sure that your message is palatable to everyone.
So do you think, sorry,
that's right.
Do you think your role is to empower women or to educate them?
Well, it seems kind of condescending to say it's to educate them.
Yeah.
And then empowerment is kind of, what does empowerment mean now? Well, empowerment means giving them the tools to go forward and conquer, technically. I've never seen my job as either, actually. People say to me, oh, you empower women. I don't see it as that. I see it as I give women the information. So I don't educate them, but I give them the information. And then they choose what they do with that information. I've never been one to, that's why, again, goes back to why I don't like columns in my products. I never tell people what to do about anything, but I give them all the information and then they carve the path for themselves. But one of the things that I have slightly veered into giving my advice is, if you want to, as a woman, be a strong and a powerful leader, and this is the same for everyone. I would give the same advice to men, to women. It's not a gender thing. You have to have messaging which reaches everyone, and you can't cut any group out of your conversation. So, it's amazing what's happening at the minute. The women's movement, more women in leadership, it is going to transform things. But as you are going about transforming things, you've got to be careful about, the kind of broken hearts you leave along the way. And I've always been really clear on, if you want to raise one group, you don't demonize another group. And so I've had a lot of experience with brilliant women not wanting to have men as part of the conversation, because it's like, well, men have had their time. And I was like, yeah, but if women's whole thing, again, generally speaking, is empathy, it's understanding the human condition, is being, really good on those things. Actually, you just because somebody has had their time, you don't demonize them. You bring them into the fold, because actually, if you cut any group out of your conversation or your messaging, maybe not today you're going to have problems, but in 5-10 years down the line, you're going to have problems, and you're going to have real pushback. And so, anybody who is a leader or anybody in a position of power, you can't just think short term and go, if this is my messaging, but it only speaks to my people, you might have success in a year, 2 years, 3 years. The smart person goes, in 10 years, I want a business or I want a career that's going to last me 10 years, 20 years. And you've got to bring everybody into that. And you've also got to assume, again, it all goes back to individuality. Nobody is the same. No man is the same. No woman is the same. No person is the same. You can be a guy and be an empathetic guy. It's why I always say that term, generally speaking. There's no one template for what a woman looks like, and there's no template for what a man looks like. It's like, goes back to imposter syndrome. That is not a gender specific syndrome. That's something that affects all of us.
So can I ask,
yes.
When you're writing an article,
yes.
when you're writing a piece, and you're envisaging your reader,
yeah.
How do you envisage your reader? Everyone's an individual. Who are you appealing to?
Well, you're appealing to, I think there's a feminine side in everyone for a start. Okay. So I have to assume they are female. However, if it was a man reading it, he will have a feminine side within him. So my job is to go, okay, it's probably going to be female, or it will be a guy who has a kind of softer side. You just have to make it emotional. Any human being responds to emotion. So everything that I do, I go for the emotion, and I go for specificity. What story hasn't been told before? That, of course, if it's made for a woman, which is my job, Usually it's going to be more emotional. Usually it's going to be less facts and figures. It's going to be more about the human being behind it. But actually, as society changes, you're going to have a load of men who, men are interested in that stuff too. So you kind of have to go for what are the values of the product that I'm working for. So if it was Elle, is it stylish? Is it smart? Is it original? Originality is at our core. And you have to make sure that that flows through the veins of your content. But I try not to think of my journalism in terms of it's just for one gender, because actually I think everybody has different genders within them. I just go for wring the emotion out of it, make them connect as a human being, and that's how you tell the best possible story.
Thank you so much indeed.
Welcome.